Kia ora and welcome to Cinema in Context, where we discuss all things film and the connections between. My name is Jeremy Downing.
And I'm Sarah Watt.
And this month, we do not have William with us. He is over in the UK. I feel like Sarah and William have been doing a bit of a swap-de-roo. Something, Sarah? But we are joined by a wonderful guest. I'm going to hand it over to Sarah to introduce who is with us today.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted to introduce you to our special guest today, one of Cinema in Context's genuinely biggest fans. He listens to every episode the minute that it's landed and then emails me with feedback. And that's because this friend and I have known one another for probably 30 years.
30?
It could be 30 years. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Dan Eichblatt.
Hello, yes. Hi.
Welcome, Dan.
You pronounced that beautifully.
And Dan, tell us, where have you flown in from back to Aotearoa, New Zealand for a vacation?
Well, I've just flown in for my first visit in 3 years because of the pandemic. I live currently in Bahrain, which is a tiny little island off the coast of Saudi Arabia. And I'm a teacher in a high school.
And so Dan and I became friends long before I was a teacher, but he was a teacher
That's
here
true.
in Auckland. So that's been your main career, I think, hasn't it?
That, for the majority of our friendship, yes.
In English and media, which is convenient, given that English and media are some of the only things I like to talk about. So that's probably why we're still friends.
And I believe that my classroom was one of the first places where you taught, because I asked you to come and talk to my students about writing film reviews.
That's true.
For a unit.
There's nepotism for you.
There you go.
Readers, listeners, watchers.
It's all about who you know.
That's right. Mr. E at Takapuna Grammar back in those days. Yes, that's right. Got me in as the film reviewer for the Sunday Star Times, and I did what I imagine was a scintillating talk to the young people. Inspired so many people to go into an underpaid, unrewarding job where nobody cares what you say, but at least being able to think and write about film. So yeah, thanks for that, Dan.
It doesn't sound too dissimilar to teaching, let's be honest.
Exactly.
Not at all. But thank you very much for having me as a guest on your pod. As you pointed out, I have been listening pretty avidly for at least the last 4 years, but before then as well. But when I moved to Bahrain, I had it was a tough time adjusting to a completely different way of life. So it was one of the things that made me feel a little more grounded was like putting on a podcast and hearing my friend's voice. And now I feel like I've got to know Jeremy and William through that as well, even though I think we're just meeting for the first time today.
Well, it's lovely to have you on board. Thanks for filling in for William.
My pleasure.
I agree. It's great to have you here, Dan. And we sort of thought we'd take this opportunity to change up the format. We like to do that every now and again at Cinema in Context. Usually, we would be discussing each month at Cinema in Context 2 films, one current and one retrospective with some connection. It could be the same director, the same actor, or a similar theme. But, like I said, we're going to be doing something a little bit different, which is the movies that made us. We're going to be talking about 5 different films each that capture a little bit about who we are, what we think about cinema, and how we like to share cinema with others. We'll probably come into this discussion as well. Usually, we would be giving a spoiler warning because we would be discussing 2 films in quite a lot of detail. I think for these types of episodes, like our end of the year summaries and similar things, we're a little bit more tight-lipped on the spoilers. So just be aware of that team as we go through. We'll do our best, if you're listening, to keep it spoiler-free. But everybody has a different threshold, a continuum of spoiler. I don't know what the word is.
Fluidity.
Fluidity.
Yes, that's right.
It's a spectrum.
It's also worth mentioning we are recording online. I currently have COVID. It's the first time I'm pretty sure I've had COVID. So I am well and truly isolating away from Sarah and Dan, especially with Dan traveling and Sarah very soon to travel again. I would not want to give you something that would disrupt those plans. So that's where we are, team. That's where we are. All right, the 5 categories that we're going to look at today is the film that we've watched the most, which we're talking about. It was a bit hard to quantify, but we're going to get there. The film that we think anyone could enjoy. I sort of got a parentheses on this, like something you could play at a movie night where you've got lots of different tastes, perspectives, ages, that kind of thing. A film that you would suggest to a burgeoning cinephile. I think about my nephew who's 15 years old, and I gave him 1001 movies you must watch before you die. That kind
fantastic.
that kind of relationship or suggestion. The film that you see yourself in, or one that you've really connected with, and your favorite film of all time. So those are our categories.
Such a simple question.
Task.
Yeah.
We'll be done in about 10 minutes, probably. Yeah.
We'll just read off the list and go home.
All right,
let's throw it to you, Sarah. Sarah, you start us off. What is the film that you have watched the most?
I found this one the most difficult category because my husband keeps a list on Letterboxd of every single film he's seen and the date that he or we have seen it, and he'll say to me periodically, "Oh, we last watched this in 2018." Well, I don't have such a list, but I am going to take a punt on a film that I know that I have watched many, many, many times, and I don't know if it's the most watched, but it'll do for now. And it's The Holiday.
Oh my God.
It's actually, I am not a rom-com person. I am the person who hates Four Weddings and a Funeral. I despise Love Actually.
Fair.
But I adore Notting Hill. But The Holiday is absolutely a film that I will go to if I am feeling sick or sad, or I will watch it at least once a year, several times a pandemic. The thing with The Holiday is this. Kate Winslet, who's basically just like me, as far as I'm concerned. Kate Winslet plays a young British writer for a newspaper, and she does a house swap with Cameron Diaz, who's also just like the American version of me. And Cameron Diaz is a movie trailer director living in Los Angeles, and these two wonderful women they're miserable come Christmas time, or the holidays as they call it in America, and they do a house swap. And so Cameron Diaz's character goes to live in Kate Winslet's little snowy cottage in Surrey, and Kate Winslet goes and lives in the most amazing mansion in like Beverly Hills or something, and they take over one another's lives, not in a single white female way, in a legitimate house swap kind of way. And then inevitably somebody's probably going to fall in love with Jude Law, and somebody might just fall in love with Jack Black, and the whole thing is basically vicarious living, or what is it called? It's like, you project.
It's like a fantasy of like the grass is always greener.
Absolutely. And boy, is the grass green in Los Angeles. And every time, this isn't really a spoiler, it happens pretty early on, but every time Kate Winslet's character wakes up jet lagged and opens the curtains and looks out onto the swimming pool at this wonderful LA villa, I just think, oh my goodness, I wish we had house swapping opportunities and that could be my world. It's so fun and it's touching, and it is, would you believe it, there is actually a very, very moving sort of sub-thread going throughout.
With the old man.
Yes.
Eli Wallach.
That's right. Eli Wallach, or Wallach, an old man who's worked in Hollywood for years, and who's, sort of losing the will to live. And Kate Winslet sort of befriends him. And
she's like a little sunray in his life.
Yes, she is. Yeah. And even that is beautiful and inspiring and makes you think we should take care of our elders.
Yes.
And,
it's a very shiny movie.
It's very
like everyone
shiny.
Looks
amazing,
good and clean and bright. Yes.
And fluffy. Everyone's wearing beautiful fluffy jumpers and silk shirts and snazzy boots, and they have beautiful hair. And
is it a Nancy Meyers movie?
I think it is Nancy Meyers. I was going to look that up, actually.
It is.
It sounds
Nancy Meyers.
Yeah.
Do you know, I mean, I can't believe I'm leading with this one, because I wanted everybody listening to actually think that I had credibility, and I realize I might have shot it in the foot right now.
You might have.
But this film I can watch over and over and over, and I will just say, and then I'll let it go, geez, you shouldn't have started me on this. There is a scene where Jack Black, who is a music composer of film music in Hollywood, which would be my ideal job if I wasn't like on a podcast, so second only to this. He takes Kate Winslet to the video store. Do you remember the video store?
Yes.
I spent all of the 90s going to the video store with prospective paramours, and we would show each other videos and we would rent movies, and the little scene that they have where he talks to her about film music absolutely touches me, because he's a total nerd. I married a total film nerd, albeit not a composer, but an editor. And it just evokes my life of that era,
Mm.
falling in love over film, and
That's lovely.
and falling in love with a kind man instead of a jerk. So yeah.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up The Holiday, because I actually rewatched it for the first time since I'd seen it originally. I rewatched it, I think, over Christmas.
Good Lord.
Because I was just like indulging in that Christmas kind of like, I'm going to watch a snowy rom-com.
And were you in Bahrain for Christmas? So it wasn't exactly snowy and cold.
I was in Barcelona.
So it was a bit colder.
Yeah, it was cold. Yeah.
Okay.
It wasn't snowing, but it was cold. But so it's kind of fresh in my mind, this film that I would not normally watch. It is fun. But what I realized is there's no antagonist. There's no villain.
What about Rufus
There's
Sewell?
very little. Yeah, but everyone ends up kind of like they have little bumps in the road, but it all ends like there's never any drama.
Well, I think Rufus. Have you
There's
seen
not
it,
much
Jeremy?
friction.
I have. I mean, there's the tension in the fact that they are living a fantasy and it's all going to end, and so it's the reality of they're living this life, but it's not real, and they're going to. It's a holiday.
Yes, that's right. It's temporary, more like, isn't it? You know, they're going to go home after Christmas, but before New Year, and then too bad if you've fallen in love with the love of your life, because you might have to give that up.
But it's not the kind of movie that would keep those characters apart.
No. Well, it isn't. No, it isn't. You're correct that
it's very
it isn't.
nice. It's jolly and it's kind.
You're right. There isn't the dramatic tension of, oh my goodness, how is this going to end? But I think there is the how will we get there?
Yes.
And I would say that for me, Rufus Sewell absolutely is the antagonist. So he's the jerky,
he's a
fiancé.
cad.
He's a total cad. So he's messing Kate Winslet around. And I do think I will say I have a real frustration with relationship movies when the characters, particularly the female characters, behave in a way that I think, for crying out loud, pull yourself together, move on. He's clearly not right for you. And I don't have a lot of patience for idiots making idiotic choices, which is so mean, but I think it's because I'm quite old now and been there, done that. But while there's a part of me screaming at Kate Winslet, do not fall for it, let it go. It's very well written. It's very credibly written as to why somebody like Iris, who's quite smart and quite self-composed, would make that mistake. That's just
and she's so likable that you kind of
likable.
You can't really judge her harshly.
No, you can't.
I think it's one of the last few Cameron Diaz films that of any kind of quality, because she's finished up now, hasn't she? I think she's supposedly coming back.
Do you mean the remake of Annie was not a quality film? Is that what you're saying? That she was miscast as Miss Hannigan?
Yeah.
or that dreadful one.
She wasn't the second coming of Carol Burnett, it turned out.
Or the counselor, that dreadful one that Ridley Scott
didn't she have
made.
sex with a car?
She kind of
something like that.
Yes, there's sexual activity on the hood of a car. I mean, with the car. But anyway, So I hear you. Yep. The Holiday was Cameron Diaz's finest hour.
Sorry to besmirch Cameron Diaz's name.
Totally
at
fine.
The end.
So that's me. That's me.
I love that. I mean, I love Kate Blanchett. I love Kate Blanchett as well.
Same.
Kate Winslet. And so that is, when I watched that movie, I think I probably watched it with my mum. And Eli Wallach showed up. I was like, I'm all for this. It's like The Devil Wears Prada or those kind of films.
Oh, yes.
That are just very easy to watch.
That's
slightly problematic in parts and really problematic in other parts.
It's very white. It's very Caucasian.
It's very white. Yeah. There isn't even a black best friend.
No.
I have an issue with there is a black best friend in Devil Wears Prada, but Holiday, But in Devil Wears Prada, they keep talking about her being fat. And I'm like, Anne Hathaway is like one of the skinniest people in Hollywood.
Yeah.
I'm like, what is going on?
I feel like that was taken from the novel, because I did read the novel.
That is taken from the novel, and that's part of the thing. So who's next then for their most
Dan, let us know
film?
you've watched.
Well, actually, Sarah's provided a bit of a good segue, mentioning video stores, because my film was so back in the day, back in the late 80s and 90s, my family didn't have a VCR, so it was a bit of a treat, maybe once a month, to go to the video store and rent a VCR and then get a video, like one for me and my sister and one for my parents. And you would think that having a treat like that would have made me watch more than one film, but I always went back to the same film.
You are a man after my own heart.
Yeah.
And what is that film?
And that film is the, I think, 1988 masterpiece, Beetlejuice.
Oh, good
by
Lord.
Tim Burton. Tim Burton, yeah, it is Tim Burton. And I feel like that was the film that really kicked off my interest in film and the possibilities of what film can do. Like, it was so imaginative and so gleeful, and kind of, it had some subversiveness to it, and I can trace like my love of a lot of things back to that film, and watching it at every opportunity that I got. Like, that film had Michael Keaton, it had Winona Ryder, it started my lifelong love affair with Gina Davis and all of her work. Tim
Catherine
Burton,
O'Hara.
Catherine O'Hara, that's exactly right, Jeremy. That wonderful scene at the dinner table, set to Deo, the Banana Boat song.
Oh, I remember.
Yep. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
The design of that film, the stop motion animation,
Good Lord.
the wacky kind of Michael Keaton performance, like it all just coalesced into something that was really, really, it just sparked a young guy's
formative.
Yeah, totally formative.
How many times do you think you've seen it?
I would hazard a guess at 15.
Wow.
Maybe. I mean, it's hard to remember.
Wow, though. Okay.
And it was one of the first videos I bought for myself when I was like in a position to buy myself a video and a VCR. But it was definitely, Beetlejuice was definitely, it was a toss-up between that and Bridesmaids, which I feel like I've seen probably the same number of times. But I felt like Beetlejuice was like a really formative film, so I thought that was good for this episode.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's awesome.
Do you guys have memories of Beetlejuice? Was that an important film for either of you?
I was 2 years old. Sorry to pull the age card, but I was 2 years old when it came out. So I
okay, thanks,
that's
Jeremy.
awkward.
That's awkward.
And you know, it's quite scary. So I didn't watch it till I was
it is scary.
Probably when I was a young adult, actually. And I loved it. And what I love about Beetlejuice, and it's going to link to one of my favorite movies because it's from another visionary director that falls into the same traps, I think, as Tim Burton, is that it's before computer generation. And some of those visual directors, they rely a lot on CGI to have their vision fulfilled. And there's something so wonderful. I agree with you, Dan, the stop animation and the way that they do things in that movie. I don't know how they do it. I don't know how, like, there's the scene with the person that's been run over and they're sort of moving through a really thin crack in a wall, and I'm like, very clever use of movie tricks.
And the woman who smokes out of her throat, she's got a hole in her throat and she smokes out of it. Yeah,
it's like in Peter Jackson's Brain Dead. There's this, which is quite different, but there's a scene where like custard is coming out of it, a neck slit. Quite a different scene, but yeah, also the house, the set is just incredible, and the way that they play with everything in the movie.
I think one of my favorite parts of the whole film is the very beginning, the credits sequence, where you're kind of traveling over what looks like a town, almost like a helicopter shot, tracking over a town and over roads and stuff, and it comes up to the house of Gina Davis and Alec Baldwin, and it kind of pans up or tilts up, and then a massive tarantula crawls over the house. So it's like you think it's a real house, but it's actually just a model, which is in their basement.
That's going to tie into another one of my films later.
It's almost like we planned this.
This is amazing. Interesting.
I think that.
So Jeremy, what's your most viewed film?
Well, I love that you bring up that memory of going to the video store and hiring a VCR. My parents bought a VCR when we were living in Wellington at the time, so I must have been about 5 or 6 years old. So we had it with us when we moved to Nelson, and I remember this film being one of those movies that we would go on Friday nights to the video store, and there would be one video for our parents and one video for us kids. Yeah. And I think this movie was probably one that was for the parents, and then they said, let's show the kids this. So we probably got it out a few weeks later. And it is Strictly Ballroom, 1992, which we may actually talk about at a future episode. We'll see how we go. We're keen to do Elvis and Strictly Ballroom, but we'll see if that pans out. But Strictly Ballroom for me has this energy about it that is a Baz Luhrmann style, but it doesn't always cohere through the whole film. and his other works. But I think with Strictly Ballroom, it's incredibly heightened. The characters are almost cast in stone. It's like commedia dell'arte or like clowning. Like they're just so larger than life. The dancing is, moments of fantasticness and lots of very good trickery on the camera. And it's just, there's something about that movie that always makes me happy, and I always love the trajectory. And it's like the Ugly Duckling story, which is, again, it's probably a bit problematic, but the Ugly Duckling story and the kind of the outcast, the footloose storyline, right? The outcast that pushes against the system, all kind of coming together in this wonderful moment at the end. And I would also pick this for my second category, which is a film that I would use for
a group viewing,
a group night, but I'll pick something else for that for today. And I actually think it's Baz Luhrmann's greatest movie, and he's made lots of good films. I do feel like I mentioned with Tim Burton, it's before computer generation.
Yeah.
He had to create things in ways that, I think Moulin Rouge, he really jumped into the CGI, but Strictly Ballroom and Romeo and Juliet really had to rely on in-camera trickery, which is just really cool to watch.
Yeah.
Jeremy, I've not seen it, I think, since it came out. And I will have seen it at least once, maybe twice, but I don't know. I'm going to have to revisit it for our next podcast. But am I right in saying there are several dance numbers?
There are. Scott Hastings, the lead character, who was played by
Paul Mercurio.
Oh,
yeah, Paul Mercurio. That's the name that I remember.
Yeah, so he is a fantastic dancer, and so there are lots of scenes with him, like whether it's the opening sequence or there's a scene by himself where he's dancing, and then there's the storyline with Fran, played by Tara. What's her name? I've got her name here. Tara Maurice.
That's right.
She wasn't a dancer, and neither was his original dance partner, Liz. Liz, played by Gia Carides. I'm reading it off IMDb. So neither of them were dancers, and so they did a lot of training. There's a lot of like stunt doubles doing dancing with Scott Hastings, because he was a dancer, right?
The reason I ask is I wonder whether with these films that we can watch time and again, like my mum will rewatch The History Boys and Mamma Mia till the cows come home. And both of those have set pieces. And I feel as though if one is inclined towards musicals or films around the performing arts, then yes, they're very rewatchable also, because you get that joy of watching the song and dance number, or the dance number as in Strictly Ballroom, which is a rewatchable thing. Do you know what I mean?
Well, it's kind of spectacle, isn't it? Like those set pieces are very kind of old Hollywood spectacle. And I think, Jeremy, I think Strictly Ballroom is probably my favorite Baz Luhrmann film. Like, I really like Moulin Rouge, but I feel like as his career has gone on, he's a lot harder to love for me personally. Like, as an English teacher, with The Great Gatsby, it's such a difficult film to watch. Sorry, that's a total tangent, but Strictly Ballroom is wonderful. It's like a comfortable pair of slippers, and it's totally predictable. How it's like a sports movie. It's like a baseball movie, and like he's going to win in the end, and everything's going to work out. But it's such fun getting there and having those dancing set pieces that are filmed in such a. At the time, I think it was like a really original, kinetic kind of film style that now we've kind of got used to as the Baz Luhrmann style. But at the time, it was really exciting and electrifying, and it was around that same time that Australian cinema had there was a lot of camp going on in Australia.
Yeah, Queen of the Desert,
Muriel
and Muriel's Wedding, and
exactly.
I just watched Muriel's Wedding with the people I'm staying with at the moment, and no one had seen it. And my gosh, it's a good film. It's devastating.
Yeah,
me too.
Yeah.
It's devastating.
It's really heartbreaking, isn't it?
Yeah,
but it's funny as well. And Toni Collette, I mean, you can see why she became a superstar after that. And I'll say about, I agree with you, Dan. One of the things I will say about Baz Luhrmann that he's maintained through his whole career is his collaboration with other artists. He's got his team. He collaborates on all of his soundtracks, which makes it really exciting. And I think that adds to the fact that it's not always lightning in a bottle, because he gives over so much to the people around him that when it all kind of does come together, it's wonderful. Like the Get Down, I don't know if you saw the first couple of episodes of The Get Down. It's a Netflix TV series that he directed, which is
Okay.
fantastic. And then the TV series goes downhill after he sort of leaves. But the other thing, I was just reading an article today, and he was talking about, it was an interview or a conversation between him and George Miller. And he was talking about the one film that he lost a battle against the studio. He always thought he could win those battles, but he lost this one, was Australia. And that, he wasn't able to kind of complete the movie that he wanted to. And he's got enough footage. He's going to make a 6-part miniseries called Faraway Downs, which I'm looking forward to, because I love the first half of Australia. And then it just, like the last half, I'm like, what's going on?
Australia is one of those films that I know I've seen, but I refuse to believe it exists. Because,
and I know I haven't, and I refuse to see it.
Okay.
So there we go.
So we're agreed.
Sorry.
It's really, the stuff that's good in it is really good in it. And they were talking about the transferability of story, and how like different audiences in different parts of the world respond to things through their own lens. And so the stolen generation of Indigenous peoples in Australia connected with the stolen generation I think under Fidel Castro or something like that, somewhere in South America, where something similar happened, and there's been no reparations of any kind, or not even an apology. So
I feel like you might want to cut and paste this part, Jeremy, into our Baz Luhrmann episode.
Yeah, true. And then it's a taster for what's going to come.
Yeah, that's right.
Hey, Dan, do you want to let us know the film that you can enjoy, or you think anyone can enjoy?
Okay, so this is one of those categories that I kind of spitballed about 15 different names, and they would all work. But I'm going to go with my gut on this one. And again, it's a bit of a nostalgic choice from my younger years in my formative cinema formation. And that is Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade.
Good Lord.
Ooh.
Yeah. Part 3. The last Indiana Jones film, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
So it's got so many appealing aspects to it. I thought about Raiders of the Lost Ark, and I thought about Temple of Doom, but Raiders I don't think is as crowd pleasing as Last Crusade, and Temple of Doom is hugely problematic these days, when culturally and ethnically, and it's also extremely violent, quite scary. So that I think that kind of excludes it. But Temple of Doom is like Indiana Jones at his purest. You've got a prologue with River Phoenix as a young Indy. You've got the dad relationship with Sean Connery, which is like Harrison Ford and Sean Connery as dad and son. I think that's always going to be a crowd pleaser, I feel. You've also got that kind of meta-ness of having Sean Connery in a film that has a lot of similarities with a James Bond film. Like a lot of the set pieces in Last Crusade are very Bondian, I think. It moves at a breakneck speed. Like there are so many scenes and scrapes and like adventures. Like there's an escape from a sewer that's full of rats after they've discovered, like they've got the little rubbing from the tomb, and it's all just like following these puzzles that have to be solved. You've got Harrison Ford doing a bit of comedy accent work. I think it's the funniest Harrison Ford's ever been.
Which is saying something.
Because
there was I saw a headline yesterday about Harrison Ford, a grumpy old man at 80, but the grumpy old man who's been the grumpy old man his whole life.
Exactly. Yeah. I think also in Last Crusade, he's less Han Solo kind of reckless, mischievous imp, and more kind of like the character's more lived in, and he's more of like there's more emphasis on him being a professor at the university before he goes on the I think Denham Elliott kind of gets in touch with him, the late great Denham Elliott. And then you've also got the love interest of Alison Doody and the double crossing and the Nazis that are so easy to root against. It's not quite as culturally problematic as the other films. And then you've got the wonderful final kind of situation with like having to solve all those little puzzles and riddles. And then the bad guy's hubris leads him to the most opulent cup, and of course that couldn't be the cup of Christ. It had to be the simplest, most basic, because Jesus was a carpenter and
as poor. Was Harrison Ford.
As was Harrison. True.
Actual. before he became Han Solo.
It's very meta.
I love that you bring this up, Dan. I love
sold
this.
it to me, eh?
Have I?
Yeah,
I really. The more I thought about it, I was like, yeah, this is a crowd pleaser, and there's no strong language, there's no sex. Well, there's a bit,
Oh, I
but
can't
not
be
much.
doing with that.
But,
Can't be doing with sex in movies.
Everyone would enjoy Indiana Jones.
Oh,
I think.
lovely.
Yeah. So
Wonderful final shot as well. They're literally right off into the sunset, and the
Yeah.
credits sort of roll. And it's a really long shot, if I remember correctly, because the credits roll for a while.
That's
and
true.
Do you know what's his name? Julian Glover, who plays the villain. Do you know who he is? He's in Game of Thrones. Did you know that?
I've never watched Game of Thrones.
Neither have I.
Okay.
Oh,
Okay. Well, for listeners out there, he's Pycelle, the old man in Game of Thrones. That lives in the King's in King's Landing. I have to say, I agree with you about Temple of Doom. I also think it's a messy movie. Like I think it's the offcuts of sequences from the first film. But what it does have, in my opinion, is one of the greatest opening sequences of all time. And this is the musical side of me coming out.
Yes.
But it's is it Kate Capshaw? She ended up, I think she's Steven Spielberg's wife. They got married at the end of that movie. She sings "Anything Goes" in I believe Cantonese. Yeah. Which is wonderful and just makes no sense. And it's there and it happened.
And I'm so glad it happened, because I totally agree with you. That's what that sequence almost put that film into made that film my answer. But the rest of the film doesn't quite hold up to the opening sequence.
Yeah. Sarah, jump in, tell us your film that you would suggest to a group of people at the end of a dinner. Everyone's a bit tired. They're ready for a couple of hours of fun. Where are we going, Sarah? Tell us.
Well,
don't say Requiem for a Dream.
No, not Requiem for a Dream. What a movie, guys. No, I think we're going on a little bit of a journey with Jason Bateman, Rachel McAdams, Kyle Chandler, Sharon Horgan from Ireland, Jesse Plemons, and Billy McStupiderface. What's his name? Billy Magnuson. Oh my gosh, ladies and gentlemen, game night. What a good time. Unbelievable. Yep. So, went to see game night thinking, oh yeah, whatever. Absolutely freaking loved it. A couple weeks later, got on an aeroplane. We watched it again on the aeroplane. 10 days after that, it was New Year's Eve. We were with family and we weren't out partying because that's not how we roll. And we watched game night. It's beginning to sound like it's my most watched film. I don't know that that's quite the case, but holy mackerel, I've never met anybody who didn't like it. Totally. And I do think, therefore, it's okay, apart from Jeremy's face down the camera.
I haven't seen it.
Well, that's all right. At least you haven't, but
I love games.
Oh my God, you would love Game Night. I wrote an article about it on flicks.co.nz. About why Game Night is
I read that.
An underappreciated masterpiece. Of course, then everybody was like, it is a masterpiece, which made it appreciated. But but point being, what a terrific film. It is funny. It is clever. Jason Bateman plays the role that he plays in everything. Horrible Bosses, Ozark, you name it. But he is the kind of guy who can get away with being himself. He even still wears the Nike sneakers and the plaid shirt and the tucked into the jeans guy.
Yeah.
But he is adorable always. Rachel McAdams is so funny and so cutesy and so great. And all the aforementioned characters or actors are absolutely terrific.
Sharon Horgan is wonderful.
Sharon Horgan is amazing. Yep. They all are. And the wonderful thing about the film is it's not pure rom-com. It is mystery. It double, triple, quadruple crosses. I mean, you don't need to even know anything about a plot. It's just a game night that's taken too far. It is such a good time. And it is so rewatchable.
And someone gets sucked into an airplane
propeller. I think we might call that something of a spoiler.
Oh, I didn't say who it was.
No, you didn't say who. No, that's right.
I do love a good propeller explosion scene.
Well, there we go.
Exactly.
Well, there we go. So there you go. It literally has something for everyone. That's game night. So Jeremy, please take that under advisement.
Yes.
Well, you know how much of a massive board game fan I am. So
huge.
It's been one that everyone who finds out I haven't seen it as a movie and board game, they're like, you haven't seen Game Night?
Yeah.
Which, when people do that lots to you, you kind of get an attitude about a movie and you're like, oh.
Yeah.
So
and may I just say, the connection to what Dan said about Beetlejuice is the very, very beginning of game night is like a helicopter shot over a small town, and then it comes up to the house. No, it's the reverse. What it is it looks as though, it's a shot over a game board, like a Monopoly board with little houses and whatnot, and then it gets to the house, and the house becomes real, and Jason Bateman and Rachel McAdams' characters come out of it. So actually, it's the reverse of Beetlejuice.
Well,
if you
still
get
a
what I
connection,
mean.
yes.
It's a connection. Here we go.
No large tarantula, though.
Different film, different
what's
movie.
What's your something for everyone film,
Jeremy?
Jeremy?
Well, like I said, I think Strictly Ballroom would always be that film that particularly if people hadn't seen it. But I'm going to go with a classic, and I don't have much more to say to build up to it. Just to say that the film is 1985's Back to the Future.
Aye.
By Robert Zemeckis.
Why not?
That movie, one of the things that really strikes me about that film every time I see it, and it's the one thing that I think it has over the sequels, and I love the sequels, but the one thing that the first one has over the sequels is that everything in that movie, particularly before he goes back in time, in some way pays off later on in the film, or in some way you need to know these details to get the joke or to get that plot point. And it's a expertly crafted script. And I've got a T-shirt that says Twin Pines Mall, but one of the things I always wish it had on it was Lone Pine Mall, because this is a spoiler, but if you haven't seen Back to the Future, what are you doing? But one of those pines gets destroyed in the past, and so when the end of the film they return to the mall, it's Lone Pine Mall, which I always thought was a wonderful little detail that would have cost a lot of money to produce that sign, that little detail in there. But yeah, wonderful performances from Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd, as well as the entire cast, and music's fantastic. And I love the idea of a science fiction time travel film going back a generation to the 1950s. It's just wonderful. Yeah, Back to the Future.
Lovely.
Yeah, it's comforting. I think Michael J. Fox is always a real kind of... He's like Tom Cruise. Like you feel in safe hands when you see Michael J. Fox. There's something kind of reassuring about it.
Do you think that's because of our age and the time we grew up in?
Totally, it's the family ties. Alex P. Keaton. Yeah, he was just always a presence. If you grew up in the 80s, he was the guy.
That's true, isn't it? And I mean, if you're like me, I look back on the 80s as being the good old days, the safe days. I tend to forget about cocaine wars and the Cold War and,
the AIDS crisis.
And the AIDS crisis and the IRA bombings and things like that, and just think, those were the halcyon days, and that the world's all gone to pot now. And I agree that Michael J. Fox is sort of emblematic of of those times.
Yeah. I think that's a great choice, Jeremy.
Well, thank you. Shall I move on to something a little bit more, well, not too much more stranger, but it came out 10 years later.
Go on, then.
Switching it up. So this is my film that I would suggest to a burgeoning cinephile. I had to really think about this. What's a movie that would be still accessible to somebody who's not quite fully into the Lynches, or like I think I said to Sarah in my message, the Cronenbergs. I've never really liked Cronenberg. I want to like Cronenberg, but his films always leave me kind of feeling a bit dry. I don't know, let down maybe. Love Lynch. Love me some Lynch. But the film that I've gone with is Terry Gilliam's 1995 12 Monkeys.
Oh, wow.
Which at the time was probably quite a well taken, accepted film. But I think the fact that it's almost 30 years later, 20 years? 30 years. Almost 30 years later, adds a layer of, you have to kind of be open to watching an old movie, which for a burgeoning cinephile, I would say is a good thing to push past. But 12 Monkeys, it is starring Bruce Willis in a very un-Bruce Willis-like role, Brad Pitt in a very un-Brad Pitt-like role, which I believe he got nominated for an Academy Award for.
Yeah, he did.
I think so, yeah.
And the wonderful Madeleine Stowe, who I haven't really seen in much recently for a while. But story of time travel. The world has been destroyed by a virus, so very timely. And Bruce Willis's character is sent back in time to get an original unmutated version of the virus, so those in the future can.
Good Lord.
Have you seen it, Sarah?
No, I've seen it back in the day, and
Mm.
now I'm like, virus movie. That's current.
Yeah.
Although it's clearly not that current, but and now you're piquing my interest
Oh,
because
it's really good.
I think I saw it the once and went, oh, that's really good, but gross, and I don't see that again, and put it away.
I would watch it again just for Brad Pitt's performance because
Yeah.
I remember that was really indelible, and I think that year I was super into the Oscars at the time. And I felt really bad that he didn't win. You know, when you're like, you deserved it. I don't know who won that year, but I felt like he deserved it.
It was a great performance, and it's sort of at that, it's that perfect Oscars kind of bait, isn't it? Somebody with significant mental health issues, which we probably would. I don't know. Maybe it doesn't hold up as well today. I haven't gone back recently and watched it.
Yeah.
But the conceit of the film is that Bruce Willis goes back in time and is put into an asylum institution because they believe that his rantings are of a paranoid, delusional, schizophrenic nature, and really he's just been sent back too early. So it's a great movie, and I would also say that it's a gateway into more Stranger Gilliam-esque stuff. So you could go kind of Fisher King, which is more existentially strange, or Brazil, which is just very weird, and I think that would then get you into some more stranger territories from there. So there you go, 12 Monkeys. Over to you, Sarah. What's your film that you would suggest to a burgeoning cinephile?
Can I just say, I love how you say, 12 Monkeys is a 1995 film, so, it's trying to get them to go back and look at an old movie. To me, 1995 is very current, because my film, ladies and gentlemen, is a 1990 film by my favorite director of all time, Uncle Martin Scorsese, and it is 1990's Goodfellas.
Ooh.
Now, the reason Goodfellas is, for me, a film that every burgeoning cinephile should see is partly because it's in my top 5 best films of my whole entire life and always will be. It is known to be a fantastic film. This isn't esoteric Sarah, coming up with something too random. It is a fantastic crime genre gangster movie. Who the heck doesn't love that kind of stuff? Full respect to anybody who's a burgeoning cinephile who feels that actually if a film is too violent, that's not for them. And unfortunately, that will put the kibosh on them watching Goodfellas. But honestly, the performances, Robert De Niro, Joe Pesci, and of course the late and great Ray Liotta in indisputably his finest film. Lorraine Bracco, who went on to be in The Sopranos, just flipping everybody. The whole film is a masterclass. And also, of course, as you two as media and English teachers will appreciate, it literally is a masterclass in the use of voiceover, in the use of editing, in the use of the extraordinary, very, very long tracking and dolly shots. The Copacabana shot in particular, everybody knows it. The soundtrack, the use of the music, everything about Goodfellas is absolutely, as far as I'm concerned, if you're going to get interested in film, you have to see it because you've got to have a view on it. And actually, it's all right if for some completely inexplicable and as yet unimaginable reason you don't like it, because you've still got to see it in order to have that view, or to know, or to be able at very least to get the joke when you're hanging out with friends and you're all sitting around a table getting drunk, and then someone says, am I funny? Are you what he doesn't say, are you talking to me? No, I've ruined it. What's he say? He says, you think I'm funny? Do I amuse you?
Do I amuse you?
You've got to understand where that's coming from, otherwise forget about it. Forget it. It actually isn't a line from that. That's from Donnie Brasco. But anyway, so there we go.
Yes, well, I would totally agree that Goodfellas would be. So, my, do you want mine?
Yeah.
So I tried to think about, like, what does that mean, a burgeoning cinephile? And I would imagine you'd want to push someone towards something that they have to work out a little bit, that maybe there's multiple interpretations, that maybe a more mainstream film might not have. So I went through a whole list of different films, and the films of Darren Aronofsky came up. I thought that would be a really good starting point, and nice. I'd probably show that burgeoning cinephile mother because I feel it's really contentious and really polarizing.
And then you could put them off film for life,
And then they
Yeah.
could become a book lover instead. That's
Okay,
right.
so we've got a bit of polarization here.
No, I loved Mother, but I'm just saying.
I hated Mother.
Yeah, he hated it, and so But
well,
anyway,
I didn't arrive at Mother. I thought that was maybe an advanced class cinephile.
Right.
But like as a starting point, I thought Donnie Darko would be a good choice.
Ooh,
I agree.
Yeah.
love that.
And the reason I chose that was because I remember seeing that at the New Zealand Film Festival and just I felt like it changed me, like I wasn't a child. I wasn't really in my formative years in the way that Beetlejuice affected me. I was in my early 20s probably. I was at university. I was studying film.
I think those are our formative years.
I think those were the more formative years, yeah. And to this day, and I think this is one of the key things, is that I don't fully understand it.
No.
And I'm not ashamed to admit that. Like, it still is a bit of a puzzle box to me.
Do you not understand wormholes and time loops? And do you not understand that?
It's like you fold a piece of paper in half and you
stick a pencil
through it. Yeah, that's basically science.
And that's in Thor as well.
Yes,
so
it is.
therefore,
It is.
so that's all you need to know.
Yeah.
Okay, right.
Simple.
Yeah.
But Donnie Darko is so beautiful and poignant, and yes, I do have a bit of a crush on Jake Gyllenhaal, of course.
So do I.
I mean, that was probably the starting point, but it's a great cast. It's incredibly creepy with the bunny rabbit, and it's got Drew Barrymore. It's got
Tears for Fears.
Fears.
Head Over Heels, the most amazing
soundtrack.
Amazing scene.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that wonderful shot where they get out of the back of the van and the camera is
That's to Head Over Heels.
Is it?
It's in slow-mo as well to start with.
Yeah.
Oh.
I love the moment where the therapist, she agrees with Donnie. Like she's sort of helping him make sense of his delusion, and then she starts to believe that he's probably telling the truth, which is kind of terrifying. There's this moment of, oh my gosh,
Yeah, yeah. And it's also got the exquisite line reading of "I'm beginning to doubt your commitment to sparkle motion," which I've quoted in every context.
That's the girls, isn't it? Who are
the dance troupe.
The mother.
Yes.
Is she a teacher or is she a parent?
She's a parent, but she comes and does lessons with the kids. You know how she's talking about the spectrum of everything falls on the spectrum of love or fear, right?
Yeah.
And Donnie really hates that.
Yeah.
And
I hate that in life. When people say, "Oh, you're angry, you're just afraid." I'm like, no, sometimes you can just be
actually
angry.
believe it.
Yeah.
I believe it 100%. And we could do a whole freaking podcast on that. But
On
okay.
sparkle
And I
motion.
didn't get it off of Donnie Darko, but I hear you. Okay.
But I feel like that's accessible. Yeah. It's accessible for someone who's like starting that journey. And it's kind of mainstream and exciting enough.
But it's also indie enough. That's the thing. It isn't mainstream in a Fast and Furious way or a Top Gun Maverick way or whatever. So I agree. I think that's a superb choice.
It requires attention.
Yes, it does.
Yes.
I suggested that to my 15-year-old burgeoning cinephile nephew a few weeks ago, and he loved it. So
really,
there you go. Your theory was put into practice very recently, Dan. Dan, do you want to carry us on? Talk about a movie that is connected with you, or one that you kind of see yourself in.
Oh, okay. So I figured this was the category that was the most kind of revealing or potentially like vulnerable making.
Yeah.
Because like film is a really personal medium, I think, and the things that resonate with you in film can be quite exposing when you talk about them with people. So I will trust you to.
It's just between the three of us, Dan.
The three of us.
Don't worry, no one else will hear.
Just you two and your number one fan. So, well, I am a homosexual person, and so therefore I kind of went towards the films that like portrayed how I was feeling, not necessarily that I saw myself in, but portrayed how I was feeling as I was growing up gay. And there were two that I couldn't really choose between, but I did choose. The first one was like it's called Beautiful Thing, and that was kind of from my childhood, and that was the first film that I watched that I was like, this is resonating with me in a way that that other things haven't resonated with me before. But the one I settled on was Weekend by Andrew Hay.
Oh, yes.
Which is a pretty small, maybe slightly unknown or less known film. But Andrew Hay, I think, went on to make the TV show Looking with Jonathan Groff.
Yeah,
and
good show.
Yeah. And Weekend was basically just a two-hander between these two guys who have a bit of a meet cute in a gay bar and spend the weekend together. And one of them is has got the ticking clock of he's moving to a different country. So they've got this like short-lived but very intense and extremely human connection. And it just entails them talking, drinking, taking drugs, having sex, just spending time together and being really drawn towards each other, knowing that it might not last. And it's just really poignant and true.
It's
and
a
very
beautiful
honest.
film. I remember when it came out. I'm sure I gave it 5 stars. Do you remember who the actors were? It's not Josh O'Connor, is it?
I can grab IMDb.
I've got it right here.
You've got it there?
Tom Cullen and Chris New. One of them showed up on Downton Abbey. I remember that.
Really?
Oh, I think, yeah, that's what I'm thinking of.
Tom Cullen looks like the kind of person who would show up on Downton Abbey.
Yeah.
He was the darker haired one, right?
He doesn't look. Both of the photos are not very helpful on IMDb. I can't tell who is who. I love that movie as well. I mean, as a queer man myself, I remember watching that and it being quite just real. One of the things that struck me is and I wasn't really out then when I watched it, so I wouldn't fully understand this until now, really. But just the relationship with the family and how they're asking and inquiring about his love life, and he kind of feels very like, I don't know how to talk about this, because it's really hard to talk about those things in those settings, because you know that family members have a lot of underlying understandings about what romance is, that if you truly see what you said, it would be quite confronting for people, because it would challenge their own perceptions of, I guess, heteronormativity. And so I found that tension. I remember watching it, not fully understanding it, but being really curious about it, and then understanding years later what was going on in that moment.
Yeah, there was the whole opening kind of situation where he was hanging out with his straight friends, and it kind of spoke to that situation where you're gay and you're in a straight environment, and you love the people and they love you and they're totally accepting of you and they are your people, but you don't 100% fit in, and he felt a little bit alienated, and it wasn't anything to do. It wasn't anything about him not liking the people,
or them being prejudiced, or them being prejudiced.
Exactly.
Yeah, just like not fit.
Yeah, and so and he was lonely within that setting, just missing that one thing that he needed. And I felt that was, and I feel like it's one of those universal stories. I don't think it's like an exclusively gay story, but at the same time, it kind of is. Like the experience that he has is, I don't know. I don't want to say anything too absolute, but
speaking as the only not gay man in the village right now,
you're in the minority.
I have seen it. I'm a minority.
Yes.
I have seen it, and it was definitely moving and touching, relatable and transferable. But I do totally get the power for you to see yourself or your prospective self on screen. I totally get that that's something that isn't my place to feel or to have, but I would say it was absolutely relatable, beautiful.
As an ally, you can totally feel
that's right
empowered to share that experience with us.
Yeah. So
yes. I can't help but see it in connection with 2 films. One is Brokeback Mountain, which I love, but it's so sad. It's another sad gay story where someone dies at the end. And the other one is God's Own Country, which is not sad. It's got quite a wonderful ending.
That's the one with Josh O'Connor, I think, that I'm thinking of. Sorry, as you were.
Yeah, it's set in the sort of at a farm, and I don't know if they're in Scotland or in the north of England, somewhere like that. Very rough and rugged, but I loved that movie as well.
That film was interesting because you would almost expect the setting to have a lot of homophobia, but there didn't seem to be, no one was really racked with guilt or insecurity or shame around their sexuality. He was just a promiscuous guy, but there was no commentary about that, about his gayness. That was a great film. Yeah.
Nice. Thanks, Dan. Sarah, what's the film that you connect with, that you saw yourself in?
What did you see?
I feel very unvulnerable and very superficial here right now, because while you're talking, I'm listening 100%, but then there's 10% of my brain also going, Sarah, choose something else, because I'm trying to think what connected with me in a more meaningful way. And I will just say that on my shortlist for these films was Silence of the Lambs, which is one of my top 2 favorite films of all time.
Do you enjoy eating people every now and again?
Well, that's it. You see the cannibalism,
the Chianti.
it's relatable.
It's the Chianti, right?
It was all around Jodie Foster. I wanted desperately to be like Jodie Foster, to have her career when I was younger and wanted to be a bit of an actress, and was a massive fan of her. And the film I found very affecting, and I found it very affecting in a cinephiliac way as well. The soundtrack and the blah, 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 blah. And my interests in law enforcement, and I trained as a lawyer and so on. However, I did not choose that as my see myself in it film, because I can't see myself in it, and I would never be as intrepid as Clarice Starling. So this is where I come off as almost as superficial as anyone who would choose The Holiday as their most watched film. A film that I come back to time and again is The Talented Mr. Ripley. Now, I do not see myself in Tom Ripley, but God bless Matt Damon in that incredible role that he played. Tom Ripley, of course, is somebody closeted and insecure and incredibly bright and lacking his own sense of identity and desperately trying to create an identity out of the people around him, all of whom are absolutely horrific and rich and snobby and awful. I don't see myself in any of that. But I absolutely adore the film and everything about the film and the way that it is made and directed, but certainly performed. And I think actually for me, it's Italy in the 1950s. If I'm right in saying that it was the 50s, I'm fairly sure that it is.
I think so, yeah.
I am a huge Italophile, and I speak Italian pretty well, and I spend all my holiday dreams in Italy, and I can't wait to go back. And I also am somebody who loves to hark back to whatever I think of as being the halcyon days of yore. And for me, maybe the 1950s would have been that. Of course, if I'd been in the 1950s, I'd be miserable, because I would be oppressed and, and there would be a terrible political situation and so on. So really, it's escapism. It's living vicariously as if I were Cate Blanchett, whom we mentioned earlier, with a tiny waist and a beautiful skirt and the most amazing costumes and all this wealth.
But not Gwyneth Paltrow.
Or Gwyneth. I love all Gwyneth's outfits in the whole thing as well. I love them being in Italy. They go down to what's ostensibly towards the Amalfi Coast, or down towards, even souther than that. I love them being in Rome. And so really, what a banal example compared with yours, Dan. But
I don't think it's banal. I just think it's unusual.
Really?
Just surprising, I suppose.
I think it's not that I see myself characterized, it's that I see myself living
you just want to go there.
That world. Exactly.
Right.
Gee, that would be nice, wouldn't it, to stay at the Daniele and to have that kind of money for a weekend and to look like that and be like that and eat in those cafes and live in that era.
And to kill someone and steal their identity.
See, maybe not that part. I'd probably let that part go, actually.
Okay.
You know what? Later, I'm going to think about this record, and I'm going to go, Sarah, you should have gone with blah, blah, blah.
Silence the Lambs.
So that's right. So I'm going to spend the rest of the podcast half listening to the rest of you while I come up with something better.
I love this, Sarah.
Mm.
I love both of your movies, both The Talented Mr. Ripley and Silence of the Lambs. There is a real darkness in those movies in terms of what's happening on right in front of us, but really you're connecting with a whole range of things underneath. I guess speaks to all of our confidence in engaging with cinema, because I think some people would rally against that. It's like when I think about my mental health took a real dive in the first quarter of this year, being remotely working for 8 months, just kind of really plummeted. And so a lot of films I couldn't handle, anything with any kind of real human emotions. I was just like, anything too real I couldn't handle. Whereas horror films, give me, sign me up. I can watch genre horror films because it is so heightened and that's quite a happy place for me. Whereas for other people, when their mental health's low, it's the worst thing for them at that time.
Yeah.
That's just interesting here. I guess we're getting a sense of what you do connect with, Sarah, which is the look, the sound, the place, the
But
people,
also,
the heart.
I think you've helped me out, Jeremy, and I can redeem myself somewhat. What those two films do have in common is protagonists, if you count Hannibal Lecter as a protagonist, or indeed Clarice Starling, and obviously Tom Ripley in the other, as deeply flawed humans. I'm fascinated by deeply flawed humans. I'm fascinated by criminals, and I'm fascinated by what causes somebody like Tom Ripley or Hannibal Lecter to be the way they are. I'm actually not very judgmental about people who do terrible things. I'm much more inclined to want to figure them out psychologically, and I'm much more inclined to show them some sort of compassion. And so actually, I would like to redact my former answer and say the reason I'm drawn to those two is because I have a strong sense of social justice, deep compassion for the socially criticized, and that's maybe also something that I'm drawn to, because I will watch dark movies throughout a pandemic. I'm absolutely drawn to the gritty documentaries, the cults, the horrible stuff.
Yeah,
I get that, and I think I see that you are a lover of people, right? And I think those movies have the enigma of Hannibal Lecter or Buffalo Bill or Ripley himself, and the protagonist, the female protagonist, that you could potentially put yourself in their shoes and think, how would I engage and figure this person out to, the best outcome for all?
Yeah.
Right. Well, I'll jump in with mine. I mean, there's a clear link to all of these, because I agree with you, Dan. And I think, as you know, it's interesting when I look back at my cinema watching time and the films that do anything with kind of queer representation, particularly male representation. I'm drawn to it, and I'm also repelled by it. Like I've never seen and do not want to see the one that everybody loved, Call Me by Your Name. Because I find the whole dynamic of a teacher-student relationship, I just find that too gross. And now with Armie Hammer coming out with all sorts of weird things, I don't think I'll ever watch it. But, so it kind of can go...
It would be ruined for you now. Yeah.
It could go both ways for me. I didn't want to see it anyway beforehand. But if it connects with me, it really connects with me because it will speak to something that you just don't see on cinema. So I'm going with a film called Crazy. Crazy. Which came out in 2005. So you mentioned a film festival viewing of Donnie Darko, Dan. I mean, I would have seen this at the film festival in Wellington when I was working at the Embassy Theatre. And I just remember, those moments where you have just such a simple phrase that sits in your mind. And mine was, "Oh, that's me," like that kind of simplicity. And I think it was him dealing with his homosexuality, but it was completely contextually in his family, which, I mean, for any queer person, that's always a big part of their journey, is how that makes sense in their family. And it was hopeful as well, because it's a story, and this is a spoiler, but hey, for anyone watching, maybe they'd want a bit of hope. It's about his relationship with his dad and his fear of losing that really special relationship with his dad with being gay. And ultimately it resolves in quite a positive way, which again, I think is something we're saying about queer cinema. It's so often negative. Like, I know how important it is to understand and learn about the AIDS crisis, but so many AIDS stories are just horrifically depressing. And it's, and sometimes they are a shorthand for, gay relationships are doomed, which is just a horrible message to get all the time. But that's crazy. And I do want to shout out to the director and co-writer, who went on to do Wild, which I love, Dallas Buyers Club, and he did Pretty Little Lies. No, what's the one? Little Big Lies? Those
Big Little Lies.
Big Little Lies.
No,
he passed away last year. Jean-Marc Vallée.
Vallée.
He died. It's really sad.
Yeah.
Did he really?
Yeah, December of last year. Christmas Day, maybe?
Oh.
Yeah, Christmas Day last year.
And was Crazy was it French? Is my memory serving me, or was it in English?
French Canadian, yeah. And they spent a lot of the budget on the music because they had Pink Floyd and Rolling Stones, all these great songs from the 60s, David Bowie,
Yeah.
Good times.
Do you know what's awkward? Both of my films actually are queer texts, and they are very, very negative, because Buffalo Bill is portrayed as really, really negative. And so is Tom Ripley, by dint of being, God bless him, murderous charismatic, lacking in identity.
He's duplicitous to a murderous degree.
So that, and also Jodie Foster's gay, but we didn't know it at the time. So there you go.
I feel like Jodie Foster was always kind of coded as lesbian.
Maybe. But Silence of the Lambs, deeply problematic from a queer angle.
It was picketed. It was like protested against.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Mind you, I would say 12 Monkeys, deeply problematic from a mental health aspect. I didn't want to get into it, Jeremy. You've heard me rant about how I feel about the depiction of mental illness on screen. We don't have time for that. But yeah, interesting, isn't it? Anyway.
I do like that idea that you resonated, or a film resonated with you, that was more uplifting, and the queerness or the homosexuality was just part of the tapestry of the story. It was front and center, but it was also like within a whole lot of other things going on. And I must admit, I did see Crazy once, but I can't remember very much about it. But I remember having a really warm and comforted feeling from it, because it wasn't following that bury your gays trope of like, here's a sad gay person and they're going to die in the third act, or they're going to produce some kind of like pathos for the straight characters to kind of coast on, which was, I think, really endemic in the 90s and early 2000s. And like you say, Brokeback Mountain is a complete masterpiece. It's absolutely wonderful, and it's almost my favorite film of all time. But and it should have won the Oscar.
I agree. Yep. For many
Over
reasons, because what's the face is all embroiled and stuff now.
But it definitely lived in that cliche of one of them had to die, and it was the promiscuous one, or the one who was like more out than the Heath Ledger character. Still a masterpiece though. But that's an awesome choice. The title of your film, Crazy, it was separated into letters, wasn't it?
Yeah, with dots.
I think it's the first.
Full stops.
Yeah, it's an acronym, which I found out recently, because Sarah knows in teaching, Dan, as you know, there are many acronyms, and I rally against them because I just think they're unhelpful, elitist, and quite lazy. But I found out that what I actually rally against is initialisms. So the difference between, apparently, an initialism and an acronym is an acronym forms a word, whereas initialism is just the initials. And I quite like an acronym then. So I need to kind of maybe change my narrative, because I like that this is the letters of Crazy are the 5 initials of the brothers, the 5 brothers in the family. Right. Christian, Renat, I can't remember. They're all the different names. And so that's where the Crazy comes from. But, obviously it's a pun with what's going on with the Crazy family and the kind of internal turmoil that his character's going on.
Yeah.
Interesting that you should bemoan the fact that Brokeback Mountain lost to Crash, because actually it occurs to me, ladies and germs, going back to category 1, I've probably seen Crash more times than any other film because I taught it for 3 years running.
See, I don't think those qualify.
Well,
I did think about this.
Because when you teach a film, as we all know, you watch it many times, and you watch all the scenes from it, the pertinent scenes many times. So that could accidentally be the film I've seen the most. But let's move on.
You don't have to tell people that. It's okay.
In that case,
can keep that to yourself.
Let's just keep that to ourselves. All right, what's our final category?
Favorite film of all time. Sarah, you kick us off.
This is tough.
Oh.
How do you possibly?
Well, how do you possibly, Dan, is when you're interested in film, and people know that, it's the first question everybody asks, mate. You've got to have your list ready. I've had this list going since the 90s.
Oh, so, I feel underprepared.
My favourite film of all time used to be Silence of the Lambs, but then I got real more recently, and I said, you know what, Sarah? Your favourite film, actually. And this is a film, that if you were flicking through the telly in the olden days when you had telly, and you flicked through the telly, and if it came on, you'd think, oh, I'll watch a bit of this, and you'd watch it all the way to the end. Or it's the film that I can watch at any point of any time and immediately be drawn into it again. It is
drum roll, please.
The 1995/96 masterpiece by Michael Mann, starring Al Pacino and Robert De Niro, with side actors Tom Sizemore, Val Kilmer, and Ashley Judd, and Diane Venora, and the father of Angelina Jolie. And the film, ladies and gents, is Heat.
I think I knew this about you.
Oh, you will have known this about me. And it's not to be confused with The Heat, because I used to say to the young people, they'd say, Miss, what's your favourite film? And I'd say Heat, and they'd go with Melissa McCarthy, and I'd say no. So Heat is it's a crime drama, a gangster film of sorts. You've got your cop who's not all good, and you've got your robber who's not all bad. And it's a cat and mouse tale. It goes for at least 2.5 hours. It is sensational filmmaking, sensational score, photography, performances, dramatic arc. It is gritty, it is dark, it's depressing, and it is absolutely my most favorite film of all time. And I will just share a little bit of an anecdote. I came upon it, my sister and I were visiting London and Europe as university students back in the 90s. And
shout out to Philly.
Shout out to Philly, because her sister, which is me, said to her, "We're at Leicester Square. Let's go to this movie. Here's a poster. Look, it's Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, Heat. We knew nothing more than that. Let's go." And I remember sitting in the cinema in Leicester Square watching this extraordinary film. And I remember it got to a certain point narratively, and I must have sort of either looked at my watch or thought, oh, it's going to end soon, because, you know, films don't go for that long. Oh, I wish it would just keep going. And it kept going. And it kept going, and it kept going, and the narrative kept rolling, and I was absolutely intoxicated by the whole thing. And I swear it must be 2.5 hours long.
And 2 hours, 50 minutes.
Ooh. 250, is it?
Yeah.
Good Lord. So flipping it, nearly 3 hours, and loved absolutely every minute of it to this day. And it ends with a Moby song.
Oh.
God moving over the face of the waters at the denouement. So Heat. Have you both seen Heat?
I have seen Heat. I think I've only seen it once when it was released. But I don't share your love of like gritty police, gangstery, underworld type genres. Like I appreciate Goodfellas and I appreciate Heat, but it's never my go-to. But I can appreciate a good film for sure.
I loved Heat. Yeah, I love Heat. And I think, Michael Mann, for me, there's two movies that stand out as Heat and The Last of the Mohicans, which, again, haven't gone back and watched that movie. Not sure how problematic that is, but love the music. Madeline Stowe's in that as well. But the Heat for me
This is the most Madeline Stowe has been talked about in probably 20 years.
It is! You're so right! You are so right. Everyone's going, Madeline who?
Madeline what?
That's right.
Madeline why? No, I the gravitas of Robert De Niro and Al Pacino being, well, in a film again, because they were in Godfather 2, weren't they? But they didn't share any scenes because they were separated by a generation in movie narrative land. But the gravitas of that was lost on me because I wasn't familiar with them at the time. And but I thought the pacing is so great in that film. And the things that stand out to me from a final sequence where they're hiding behind shipping containers, that whole sequence.
But don't spoiler anything.
Okay, cool. I don't remember anything else. And
there were shipping containers involved.
I can't help but think of The Dark Knight, because The Dark Knight drew heavily from Heat, especially in the opening sequence. And so I guess to make more connections, Heath Ledger's in there as well with Brokeback Mountain. But yeah, so that Heat for me has a very positive place in my movie fandom. But I've only seen it maybe once all the way through, and I can't really remember it that well. So maybe it's really time to go back.
It narratively is actually quite tricky. So when Jeremy says about the opening sequence, what you mean is the opening sequence in The Dark Knight, which has that fantastic bank robbery scene.
Yeah.
Now, there is a brilliant bank robbery scene and an extended, still actually genuinely not just by Sarah Watt, but by normal people, known as the best gun battle scene ever. Forgive me, Sergio Leone. Is the street scene in Los Angeles as the robbery has taken place. This is in Heat, and they come out into the street and have to make their way to safety. And it is extraordinary. And you're absolutely right, Jeremy, that Chris Nolan drew from that for The Dark Knight, and many other films have drawn from that for their own street battle gunfight scenes. So highly recommend.
I'm just scrolling through it on IMDb, and it has quite the cast.
It really does.
Henry, what's his name? Henry Rollins, isn't it?
Yeah, Henry Rollins plays a bodyguard.
And
Hank Azaria from The Simpsons.
Oh, wow. And Natalie Portman.
Natalie Portman is absolutely marvelous in it, as she always is. She's kind of a stepdaughter type with quite significant emotional issues. It's incredibly well written and realistic. It doesn't have it doesn't have the Goodfellas glamour, and it doesn't have the Godfather sort of styling. It has a very 1990s Los Angelian, that kind of cops and robbers type era styling from good old Michael Mann. And I hear your Last of the Mohicans, which I only saw once and never again, but I would raise you Collateral as
I do like Collateral. That's a good film. That's
Tom Cruise,
Jamie Foxx
as a roving assassin. Yeah, with
Tom
Jamie
Cruise
Foxx.
with silver hair.
Tom Cruise with silver hair.
That's all I know about the film.
It's absolutely brilliant. So yeah, that's your other good Michael Mann.
I just want to shout out. This is going to be a very strange connection, but Amy Brenneman is in this film, and she's in The Leftovers, which I parrot on about all the time. Is my favorite TV series of the decade. It's so brilliant. And Ashley Judd. Now, Ashley Judd is one of the two actors that Peter Jackson came out on Twitter recently, last couple of years, to say that they were thinking about casting Ashley Judd in the Lord of the Rings franchise. And Miramax came out and said, no, she's difficult to work with as part of Harvey Weinstein's smear campaign for those those young women that were successful in pushing office advances, and her career was sort of tanked by the Weinstein Company as a result. And this is where the weird connection comes in. We just watched Romeo and Michelle's high school reunion this week, which is fantastic. And I have
your
to
first
say,
time?
No, I've seen it before.
Okay.
But I put it on. I thought, I watched the start of it. It was like 11 p.m. at night, and me and my boyfriend and his flatmate, we ended up watching the whole thing. But in that movie is Justin Theroux, who was the lead in The Leftovers, and Mira Sorvino, who was the second person in that text that Peter Jackson said. And I can't remember if it was Ashley Judd or Mira Sorvino, but one of them came out publicly and said when they got that text, they just broke down and cried with kind of, I guess, sadness, but also relief to know that this thing they thought might have happened actually did happen. And Peter Jackson and Fran Walsh coming forward and saying that, what a gift that was. So there's a strange connection based on a
nice context. Thank you.
It's so gratifying to see Mira Sorvino at least kind of having this late career resurgence, and she's such an interesting person. And I mean, she's kind of Hollywood royalty, being the daughter of Paul Sorvino, and she won an Oscar when she was like in her 20s.
That's right.
And she was just...
That was for Mighty Aphrodite?
Mighty Aphrodite, yeah.
And that was a Woody Allen film.
And that, yes. So,
there are no problems there.
No problems that I can see.
We used to love Mira Sorvino in the 90s.
And Romeo and Michelle is just genius.
It really holds up. You know, some of those old 90s films, like Never Been Kissed, wah wah. I mean, I love it, but wah wah. Because, it's
Josie. I'm not Josie Grossi anymore.
It's the fact that her school teacher likes her, and then when he finds out she's of age, he's not interested in her anymore. I'm like, okay, this is not a good...
No. That's how it was in the olden days, Jeremy.
Hey, I'm going to jump in with my favourite movie, and then I'm going to give it to you, Dan, to finish us
off.
I'm
going to... Wow, okay.
Yeah, you get the final word.
A lot of pressure,
My favourite film, I don't think is going to be a surprise to any regular listeners, because I feel like after Buffy, I seem to bring it up in every podcast I can.
Shall I step in and say what I think it probably is?
No, you can hold your mouth. So this is a 1979 film that came off the back of Star Wars. People were excited because, science fiction and hopeful movies after a time of Vietnam War and things like that were kind of in vogue. So they went along to the cinema to see this movie that they thought was going to be, for those of you listening, Sarah's doing actions and miming out the movie. They thought it was going to be something similar to Star Wars, and that was Ridley Scott's Alien. So,
I thought you were going to say Blade Runner.
No,
okay.
Blade Runner's 82, but Alien, which was went along, and it was horrific because it was not like Star Wars at all. But I watched this movie. I used to say I watched this movie the most, and I think I watched it sort of 40 or 50 times, which tells you how many times I've seen Strictly Ballroom. And and it's the movie that just keeps on giving. There are layers of subconscious storytelling. There's themes of motherhood and other topics, which I will not mention, that are very disturbing. It's a film where, and I will say, spoiler alert, in a film of four white males, an African American and two women, the four white males get knocked out first, which I think is quite progressive for its time. It still sort of holds up. And production-wise and special effects-wise, it is still incredible to this day. I mean, the alien bursting scene is maybe a little bit, you can tell it's a puppet, but beyond that, it's really exciting. And the music is wonderful. It's the gift that keeps on giving. And the sequel is in my top 10 of all time. It's my 8th favorite film, Aliens. But Alien #1 is the movie that takes it out.
I mean, there's no real disputing that. That's a stone cold classic. And I'm glad you said Alien, because it was close to being the one that I was going to choose as my favorite today.
Hey!
But I decided to exclude any films that I'd taught in class. So Alien happened to be something that I did watch quite a lot with my kids. But it is an exquisite film. It, like, atmosphere, and the design of it, and of course the H.R. Geiger designed Alien itself, the face huggers, the cocoons, like everything about it works perfectly. But it's quite slow as well. When I rewatched it, it's actually it takes its time, and it's kind of an adult film in the sense that it requires patience, and it requires attention. It's not like a rollicking space alien jaunt. It's actually it's almost got a feeling of like a philosophical meditation sometimes.
Which he really does down in Prometheus, right? And I'll say Aliens as well. James Cameron, whilst it's much more actiony, he takes his time in that as well. It takes a good hour before it really happens.
Yeah.
And I will just say that, kind of carrying on the queer theme that seems to be coming through, I mean, naturally in this podcast with two queer people on the podcast, when I came out to my very good friends in Wellington, I went and visited them, and they gave me, and they both used to work at Weta, they gave me the Alien Epic Weta model, as sort of a nod to the chest burster and coming out, which I kind of think is amazing.
Oh, that's cute.
That's incredible.
But yeah. It's you, Dan. What's your favorite film of all time?
Now, see, I'm nervous about this because I feel like I'm playing with the big dogs, and you've got your top tens, and you've got your firm favorites and everything, and I'm just wildly shooting in the dark because I've never been able to answer this question properly. And so I spitballed a whole, like, as soon as I started thinking about one film, I started thinking about 10 others, and I cycled through a lot of things. Here are some that didn't make the cut, just so you know the eclecticism. I thought about The Hours. I thought about Rocky Horror Picture Show. I thought about A Single Man, the Colin Firth, Julianne Moore, Tom Ford film. But I have taught that in school, so I decided not to. And I ended up deciding, because favorite film is really hard, I decided on my favorite genre, and then I chose a film from my favorite genre. So I think, Jeremy, maybe you and I share this, but like I love horror as a genre. It's always my go-to genre. And even though I'm quite a happy, well-adjusted person, I love horror. And I'm going to choose something that may not be my favorite tomorrow, but it is my favorite today. And that's Robert Eggers, The Witch, or The Vivitch.
Really?
Yeah.
With
I could
Anya
regret
Taylor-Joy.
this. Yes. I could regret this choice, like, as soon as we finish recording. But right now, that feels right. It was either that or Addams Family Values. So...
which is a bit like Beetlejuice.
Right. Too much like Beetlejuice.
Yeah. Whereas The Witch is like The Holiday. So, no, okay, go, sorry.
The slander on Kate Winslet. Yeah, so The Witch was, it's only a few years old. I remember it having just the most profound impact on me. And I think sometimes when we choose our favorite film, it might not be the most highly acclaimed or whatever. Although this was quite highly acclaimed, it's the one that had the most kind of resonant and long-lasting emotional impact on you, or the one that made you feel something, something, and you held on to that feeling. So for me, it was just, I've been fascinated by, like, The Crucible was one of my favorite plays growing up, and so witchcraft and witch lore has always been of interest because it's always got that undercurrent or overcurrent of feminism, of female power. Witches have been misunderstood through generations or through time, and women have been subject to a lot of cruelty and oppression under suspicion of being a witch. All of that stuff kind of comes into play. This film was, I think, is it Robert Eggers or Dave Eggers, the director who made The Lighthouse?
It's Robert Eggers. Dave Eggers is the author
of Confederacy of Dunces. Yes. So Robert Eggers.
Yep.
Yes. So he went on to make
The
Northman and The Lighthouse. And this was this film, The Witch, was all of the dialogue was very true to its time. So it was set in the mid 1600s, I believe. As America was being colonized, the first settlers in America, and all of the language and the dialogue was very true to that time. So it's very old, an old form of English, which makes it kind of potentially a little impenetrable at first, but as you get used to it, it's actually quite poetic. And I just thought it was very, very unsettling. The goat, Black Phillip, when he offers for her to live deliciously, is one of the most chilling moments that I've ever experienced in a film. It's all very small and simple, but it's extremely affecting. And the final kind of denouement is, which I won't ruin because I think everyone should watch The Witch, is just like this perfect and horrific and spine-tingling moment, and I look for those kinds of moments in films. So it might not be my favorite tomorrow, but it's definitely in my top 10.
Wow.
Yeah. Have you guys seen it?
Yes. I haven't seen it. Have you seen it, Sarah?
Yeah, I have.
It was the first proper film, I think, that Anya Taylor-Joy. That was her first lead role, I think.
Yes, it was. That was her breakout role, and after that, it was the chess prodigy.
The Queen's Gambit.
Show. That's right. En route to megastardom.
And also the father in The Witch, which was totally unexpected. But if you remember the UK Office with Ricky Gervais, his incredibly obnoxious and very tall friend, who he was always kind of trying to live up to and impress.
Finchy?
The one who he may have thrown a shoe over a
Finchy.
pub. Finchy. Yes. Yeah. He plays the dad, and it was so unexpected.
Oh wow.
Ralph Ineson?
Yes, and he was in a Black Mirror episode, I think.
He was in. I watched the musical where everyone's talking about Jamie, or everybody's talking about Jamie, and he plays the horrible dad in that as well.
Oh, okay.
He's a great actor.
Yeah, he is. Yeah, he's got range.
Have you seen The Northman?
I have not, because in Bahrain we don't get all the films. I mean, your listeners may be interested, but we get all of the big blockbusters, but we also get a lot of really bottom shelf, straight to DVD type action films, the kind of Jean-Claude Van Damme or the bad Nicolas Cage films that would never see the light of a cinema in New Zealand or in most Western countries, but they're very, very popular in the Middle East. So sometimes it really takes me by surprise what we can see and what isn't available to us, because we weren't able to watch Doctor Strange, the recent Doctor Strange, and Lightyear was banned, and The Eternals was banned for various LGBT content. But yeah, it can be a little difficult to be a cinephile in Bahrain.
Yeah, wow. I just have to say, I haven't seen The Witch yet, and it's one I want to watch. I think The Witch and Game Night are the two I haven't seen in this discussion today. But there is part of that new wave of horror. You know, I've recently watched Hereditary, which was so great but so terrifying, and I loved Midsummer, which is the same director. I still have yet to see The Lighthouse and The Northman, but I love a good visual spectacle. Yeah,
and actually, Hereditary was close to being my choice for today, as apparently 20 other films were as well. But yes, Hereditary is incredible.
Nice. Hey, well, thank you so much, Dan, for joining us on this journey, the movies that made us, and also thank you for giving us the title. I believe you penned our title today.
Did I? Oh, I didn't intend to, but I'm gratified that you used it. Thank you, and I really appreciate being a guest on your wonderful podcast. It's a bit of a dream come true, and so fortuitous.
Now, make sure you keep listening and
keep
downloading,
subscribing.
Yeah. Cool. Any last thoughts from you, Sarah?
Well, I'm soaked with regret about the holiday, and I'm suddenly thinking, well, hang on a second, what about Singing in the Rain? You've seen that a lot. And what about Annie? And what about, because there are older films I probably have seen a lot. But I think, Evil Under the Sun, Agatha Christie. But Sarah, let it go. Do you know what? Actually, I probably would have said Evil Under the Sun. Sorry, I don't think I did my homework on this. Never mind, I'll just have to own it.
Yeah, well, once you start pulling at that thread, you a cavalcade of like a million films that you've seen.
Exactly right.
Yeah,
Terminator 2.
tumble out.
You know
All
what I mean?
About Eve.
Terminator. Well, no, I've never seen All About Eve, but Terminator 2 is in my top 10 films, and I'm sure I've seen it more than I've seen The Holiday. But did I mention it? No. Doesn't matter. I'll let it go. But what a pleasure, though, to be provoked to think about even just these 5 categories. Really interesting, actually.
Yeah.
And I'm really glad as well because you two have reminded me of films that I must revisit, and hopefully our listeners, viewers, watchers, as I like to call them, hopefully they will be going, oh, all right, that sounds good, or so-and-so's been saying I should watch blah, blah, or, so I hope that people do.
Yeah, and I really appreciate being just some guy who wandered into your podcast, and I'm sharing all my my likes with you guys, and I hope that was interesting.
Thank you for sharing your vulnerability and your personal stories and your experience. And of course, you know how to talk about film because it's part of what you do as a day job, teaching others to think about film. So yeah, what a pleasure.
Well, thank you so much.
I agree. And, we kind of, this podcast was formed out of these kind of conversations, Dan. I met Sarah one year and we talked for 2 hours non-stop about cinema. And then the same thing happened with William the year later. And I thought, let's get these people together, and shout out to Max, who was part of our crew for the first handful of episodes. I also want to shout out to Brett Goldstein. Yep, a good old Brett, who created the TV series Ted Lasso. And his podcast, Films to be Buried With, which... I think it's fair to say that the structure of this is at least an homage to his fantastic podcast where he talks to different celebrities about films that would similarly fall into these categories. So shout out to him, and another one worth listening to if you like movies. And I guess just to say thank you again, Dan. Thank you, Sarah.
Pleasure.
Thanks,
have a
Jeremy.
wonderful holiday, Dan. Have a wonderful trip, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. And I hope you feel better or get better soon.
Oh, those of you listening, I'm yes, as we know, currently COVID positive, which is not a positive place to be, but we're keeping positive.
Good for you.
How many times can I say positive? All right. Thank you for listening to another episode of Cinema in Context. If you enjoyed our podcast, then please share it with your film-loving friends. You can listen to Cinema in Context on SoundCloud, Spotify, Radio Public, Stitcher, Amazon Music, and Apple Podcasts. You can follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, which are great places to let us know what you think of this episode, as well as give us suggestions for future films to discuss and compare. Look out for our next episode in a month's time, and until then,
no more.